to the next episode of Content That Grows podcast. I'm sitting down again this episode with Derek Flint, marketing manager at 10 Speed. How's it going, Derek?
Going well. Happy to be back.
Yes. Glad to be back in studio. A little delayed from what we planned because you had the hurricane down in Florida you're dealing with, but glad everybody's all right and excited to be jumping back in. So today we are continuing on the pattern. Last episode we dug deep into Twitter distribution, kind of talked about a lot of aspects of that. And so today we're talking about LinkedIn. So we're not going through every possible social channel, but these were the two that we felt like were probably the most relevant for a lot of SaaS companies and where there's a lot of engagement. Jumping in today, I think really the goal here is just to have a lot of that sort of back and forth of, the theory and strategy of it, but also talking a bit more tactical about what you can do and how you can take away some practical things for your company to be distributing more content on LinkedIn. So I guess to get started, I think Derek would love to have you just kind of outline a few of the things that you like the reasons that you think LinkedIn is such an important distribution channel for SaaS companies.
Yeah, so I think for the first point to kind of touch on something you talked about in the very first kind of overview episode is that LinkedIn right now is one of those unique distribution channels that both can speak to an audience of followers that you've built, but it also expands your reach. So the social network itself and the algorithms are still promoting kind of this reach. We haven't necessarily seen the saturation of creators and brands producing content on there. So there's just still a ton of opportunity to grow your brand visibility, whether it's personal or the company page.
Yep.
And then pretty practically, I think around, especially if you're in the B2B space, like we were talking about before this, B2B SaaS companies are using it, and like some version, like if you're a marketer marketing to other marketers for your software, whatever you're doing, like your audience is likely there. So whether you're a sales professional or a marketing professional, or you're the CEO of a SaaS company and you're just sharing, guidance to creating a great company, growing a company, hiring talent, all of that sort of stuff. So I think in that way, it's pretty unique. And it's a career outlet, which I think is fascinating. So you're getting a bunch of people who are interested in growing and offering professional advice or receiving professional advice. So in that regards, I just think for a company, it's a really unique space. Like we talked about, it might not be for everybody. There's probably, B2C instances where your customers or clients aren't there. But I still think if they're there, it's a great distribution channel. It's still early enough to get in on the action. And it's really, I think that covers most of that. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. No, I think your point on the fact that it is like a career focused website. Obviously it started out much more that way, but that is still a huge element. And I think that you're right that it is, when done right, there's far more than just, I want to blast the marketing message of my company onto this channel. And there's just opportunities to reach your prospects, but also like develop partnerships. A lot of, companies can, gain additional attention and traction for future fundraising. Certainly hiring and recruiting top talent is a big part of that. And so people want to work for companies that they admire and that they know and that other people know about. And so there's all these things that sort of build into that there's just like, it affects so much of your SaaS company and not just like, hey, this is a place where we post our new blogs when they're ready or something, So I think there's a lot of really good stuff there for SaaS companies.
Yeah, I agree. It's a pretty enjoyable space. Like I use it personally to connect with a lot of people who are just in our industry. So there's like the prospect aspect like you talked about, but there's just a ton of skilled content marketers. Like there's reasons to be on there and learn and like share and
Mm-hmm.
trade ideas, and then promote each other, which gives everyone reach. Like it's kind of an interesting testing ground for ideas because the comment section can be pretty
Yeah.
lit at times. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's great because then you learn to iterate. Like you don't get it right sometimes. Like you give advice and you're like, oh, this sounds really good. And then someone comes in with a poignant idea of why, like, I don't know, that doesn't always work. And then your next message will be
Yeah.
that much more succinct. But I really enjoy it
Yeah.
for that ability as like a person who's, like I said, you know, loves the career aspect or the personal branding aspect of it.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's really valuable, and it's possible we'll touch on this a little bit more later in the episode, but I also think that for a company thinking about it as a distribution channel, I think there's value in knowing and understanding that um, it's not like a here and gone feed like
Mm-hmm.
many other social networks. There's when your company gets a new follower, or you, if you're posting personally, get a new follower, um, they will be shown some of your content from in the past couple of weeks. I think it's up to a month. I don't know if I've seen beyond that, but probably depends as well about the volume of publishing. But um, I think that's a lot of value too, that you think about sort of that compounding growth of like continue to get followers, and it's not entirely dependent on you having the next post, because they are seeing some of the past stuff that's done really well, and just that much more um, reach and distribution that you get for that content because of the fact that it will continue to show stuff even after the fact.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think LinkedIn's so much more enjoyable for garnering attention through distribution than like
Mm-hmm.
Twitter can be. Twitter's got the amplification, but it's just nice that your content can hang around for a little while. And LinkedIn, um, the algorithm in that way is just it treats you better. Um,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
so sticking on the like distribution part or distributing your content on LinkedIn, what are some of the things that you kind of like routinely see, companies get wrong when they do improperly distribute that?
Yeah. Oh, I think so. One, there's one that we've talked about before, and we see a lot is just um, there's still a tendency for people to create a post on LinkedIn that's maybe a little bit of intro, maybe no intro at all, and it's just a link to a blog post or video or webinar or whatever it might be, whatever the content is. They're just posting a link on there and wanting people to leave and go check it out. And so that is missing out on some of that like zero click type of stuff where people can actually consume some or all of the content without having to go to the link. So I think that's a big area where we still see that happening a decent amount. Another is just like they're just significantly less um, than what they could be doing. So if you look at any company who has been around for a little while, maybe have like 250 blog posts, a number of guides, some other content formats there. Um, you realistically could post 2 to 3 times per day every day for a year, just on the content you already have. And so I think there's a substantial, like, that's probably the biggest, most glaring thing, is just the opportunity cost of not continuing to promote what you already have. And that's not entirely specific to LinkedIn, but I do think that that a lot of that would do well in there. Another is like not understanding the different post types. So I think there's value in what we talked about before of like, what is the content format and how do you best match that to how people want to consume it. So um, very obvious one, don't post a link on LinkedIn to a video for someone to go watch it. Put the video on LinkedIn, would be one obvious area. But there are other things, that can be broken up into the carousel images or just different post types like that. And so I think that's another one. A debated aspect of it, and I think there's decent proof around this, but still I think a bit debated, is like whether or not to put links to stuff in your actual post. So you see a lot of people say, link is in the comments, and that's done because of LinkedIn limiting the reach of the post when the link is actually, like, there's a link in the post taking people off of the site. So, I would say, if anything, test it out. I don't think it's like something that's been a hard proven thing. I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think LinkedIn's come out and said like, yeah, this lowers your reach, but definitely is something to at least test out for yourself.
Yeah, no,
What was
it
that?
seems like I've read it and I've heard it anecdotally a million times, but like LinkedIn has come out and said that they
Right.
don't do that. But it just
Right.
is never the
Yeah.
case that that post does well. So I'm like kind of inclined to believe it
Right.
or just accept that as a best practice.
Yeah. Yep. Um, and then, yeah, I think the only other thing I would say is just like the consistency factor, which I've definitely been guilty of this. Like, there are a lot of times from a personal standpoint, that I'm pretty consistent with creating content and engaging, and it makes a big difference. But then I just allow myself to fall off for a while, and it really does have an impact. So I think, really, as a company, determining what you can do consistently, kind of without fail, and then some of the systems we've talked about in the past, working ahead to have content ready, so you're not like kind of always last moment trying to come up with stuff. You kind of have a backlog to be working from, to adjust when there are timing issues on your end. So yeah, I think there's a lot. I think it's like, just understanding the nature of the format, what you should or shouldn't do in terms of like where to put links and things like that. Just pulling a lot of the value out of the content and putting it into the posts, having different formats for your post depending on that, and being consistent, I think, are all things that are important, but areas where we see people kind of missing the mark sometimes.
Hmm. I think kind of like two parts that I've at least been watching and like thinking about more and more, like how they impact things, is like a lot of times we're going for impressions. Like we really want to see, that post
Yeah.
get in front of a lot of people. Um, but like video content, when something becomes a video post, it generally garners less impressions, and that has to do with how the algorithm treats those different post types. But
Mm-hmm.
what I've just, again, this is anecdotal, but like what I've noticed is that the video content, when done well, obviously, tends to garner more comments. Um,
Mm.
and I just think it's the way people engage with it and the type of people who get served video content in relation to you, um, and how that's kind of working in the algorithm, because it's trying to best determine who's right for this type of content and like who's most interested in
Yeah.
getting that information from you. Um,
Yeah.
so that's been something I've been thinking about. And then the other thing is there's a lot of talk about speed to interaction. Um,
Mm.
so it's one thing to, and you mentioned this, but like it's one thing to just like post and post consistently. It's another thing to like strategize out, well, go make 5 comments on other people's posts that are substantial, and
Sure.
then go post your thing so they're served your information, or they go check you out after you comment on their post. Um,
Right.
and then you have like these quote unquote speed views and things that we're starting to see even in tools like Shield.
Yeah. 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 I think that's a fair point. And I think, going back to what you said about the video, I think it can be really um, interesting when you look at the stats. I've seen some folks share similar stuff, but as a hypothetical, say you run a 30-minute webinar and you have whatever 100 people there who stay for the whole 30 minutes. that would be 300 minutes of viewing
Hmm.
time, essentially of your webinar. Um, and I think there are a lot of cases where you could take 3 or 4 clips from that webinar and post them onto LinkedIn, and collectively across those 4 have substantially more minutes of view time than the original 300 from the webinar. So
Sure.
again, I think it's a little bit about that like repurposing aspect that I talked about earlier, but like it when you really think about the video from that perspective, the impressions may not be that high, clicks are probably very low, but like the view time, total view time that you can um, gain from doing that and breaking it up, I think is highly impactful for a lot of companies.
Yeah, um, I took one of our posts about our blog post about using ICPs to help you kind of identify content topics and the
Yeah.
importance of understanding that type of information before you do keyword research. And I did just like a doodle video, which I think you saw.
Yep.
And that video, it's 50 seconds. And on LinkedIn now has, I think it just crossed the 600-minute mark of views. So it's like,
Yeah.
not only have people, read the blog, we've distributed that, we've broken it down, we've provided the messaging, but like a full repurpose.
Yep.
Contributed to people receiving that in a way that they were more receptive to, or it resonated with them and they didn't have to go through a long form blog post. So yeah,
Yeah. And you
wholeheartedly
didn't
agree
have
with that.
to, I mean, yeah, my example before of 100 people, 30-minute webinar, like what you did is the equivalent of 2 webinars.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that
no,
video
absolutely.
was substantially less work, less time to do that. So,
Right.
um, yeah, sometimes it's just about like really just looking at the stats and
Hmm.
and being a little more objective about that. So,
For sure.
but yeah, so I mean, I think we've already kind of touched a little bit on like, we were originally talking there about like where people are getting it wrong, what they could be doing differently. So I think we're kind of touching on it, but would love to kind of flip that a little bit and just talk about some of the ways, more tactically, that companies can be getting distribution on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, so I think what a few of the keys on LinkedIn. The first one is similar to what we talked about in the Twitter episode, which is um, the way I would start thinking about this. If your brand isn't the kind of biggest, most prominent part of like your distribution on LinkedIn yet, um,
Yeah,
then within your company, just simply identify the biggest influence, or we'll use the term influencer at your company.
sure.
So, and then from there, you start to get into, like how are you influencing, like how do you help them build content and distribute it? And how can you get your team involved? Because we see you know, a lot of teams, especially in SaaS, that are starting to get this right, for everything from like color coding the background of the headshots so people know they're all a team and they're seeing that, to,
Mm-hmm.
having 5 people post about your sweet piece of content in a different way, positioned slightly differently,
Yeah,
and how far that can go.
yeah,
And then you kind of use your brand website to pull that all together, kind of culminate, have a refined take on that. It's like one option I
yeah,
think works really well for small brands. To your point, the opposite of not being consistent, which is just to be consistent on
yeah,
there. I don't think most brands, I think it's fine if you want to do 3 posts per week. You're just consistent about it. But
yeah,
I think easily most companies can probably find time to post 5 days a week. Um, there's a little bit of co-marketing here that I think can happen, but it's less of the like link distribution in post like you were mentioning, or it's less like Twitter threads in that way. It's more of if someone posts something really great that you want to see, I wouldn't share their post. I would probably synthesize what they said and then tag them in it. This helps it
yeah,
reach, their audience as well, and it attracts them to come look at it. But you haven't asked anyone to leave the platform. So there's a different element of co-marketing, but it's still available to you. We did this by like promoting one of ClearScope's webinars when they were talking about a topic with Dooley, and it's something near and dear to our agency. So it was kind of a win-win. We got kind of that like and promotion from everybody.
Yeah.
And then something I've been just sort of, this has just been like watching and seeing, and I've heard some people mention doing this, but is having your company page function as kind of promoting employees. But a lot of times we see companies do this in a way that's like, we got a new staff member, or like, here's our new staff member's dog, which is cute and fun. And like, you can probably find a way to work that in depending on the brand's personality. But I think when you're talking about content distribution, like a really great way to do this is just to like let your employees or your founders like have their take on that piece of content, offer extreme value. They may, insert that link in the comments, yada, yada. But letting the brand highlight their posts and kind of like nod to them as like, hey, look at one of our staff members has this great take. We wholeheartedly agree with this as a company. So you're kind of like helping support each other would be my kind of like point on that, on like how you work in content distribution and this employee advocacy component of all of this.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot there. That does make sense, featuring employees, employee spotlight type of stuff, or like recognizing accomplishments. I think the other big thing there is just making sure you're just doing it all in the post, not trying to like take people to the blog post about the employee spotlight. Again, kind of hitting on that. And then, I mean, I think the only thing I would add is, again, sort of the inverse of what we were talking about before, but I think there's just a ton of opportunity to mix up the formats and like be creative about how you can take content you already have and repackage it into new formats for LinkedIn, so that everything's not a text post or a single image post. You really can do quite a bit more. I mean, even just thinking about like the number of companies that have blog posts on their site that's 5 ways to do this, or 8 whatever, like these listicles are very, very easy to translate into the carousel images and kind of pulling away those highlights, making it easy to consume. So I think there's companies that do a good job of that and really bring the visualization of data and insights in a really creative way. So there's some good stuff there.
Yeah. And so there, something I've seen a lot of these SaaS companies do well that I've even been trying to incorporate a little bit with our brand page is when you're distributing those elements and their lists or something like that, is the hook in some way being both like active voice, and then I don't know the technical term for this, but in some way like present voice, meaning like it has some applicable thing to do with what they're likely to be doing now. So like you had that post a while back about like, if I were walking into Q4, here's what I would do. Yeah. At a company. I think that type of intro tends to perform better because it sounds like you're in the here and now. You're not necessarily just throwing out a like, here's 8 best practices, but you're like leading them into those 8 best practices in a certain way.
Yes. Yeah, and like it or not, in that example, like everybody's heading in, well, unless you have some offbeat fiscal calendar, like a standard fiscal calendar, like pretty much everybody's heading into Q4. So like that automatically applies to them because of that in a timely way. Yep. Totally agree.
Yep. Yeah. So I'd be curious what's your opinion on the whole, company page versus personal profiles, or both for the SaaS companies we're seeing on LinkedIn?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think, the easy answer is like both, always eager to say, let's do it all, do everything. And so I think the ideal is to have both. You have, um, whether it's CEO or just a number of prominent folks on the team who are frequently uh, distributing and publishing via their personal profiles and sort of building that up in a very relatable person to person way. But then you also have brand pages that are sharing a lot of content, a lot of insights, and just continue to add value. When you have to make the decision because of resources, I think there's two ways you can go about it. Like um, you can just say we are going to do both, but we're just going to commit to like 2 posts a week or 1 post a week from the company page. But again, staying consistent and just committing to whatever you're able to stick to. So I think that's an option, or um, just try to do as much as possible with one or the other, and then just share kind of what's happening there. So talking about sort of like bare bones, we're a marketing team of one, spread thin, like can only do so much. I think that's kind of where we would start. But then again, yeah, so the ideal I think is having both. And I think one of the big reasons that uh, I think this is still extremely important to build on the company page is that is sort of no matter what happens with team members or some of the bigger influencers, because we've certainly seen some of the marketing influencers, if you will, in the B2B space have moved on. And as a
Mm-hmm.
company, if you haven't built that up within your own realm, and you're solely depending on this one employee who's built up a big following, then I think you will feel that pain when they leave, and you don't have something to keep going and be consistent. So I do think there's a big value in companies continuing to share good content and build up their own audience there, and then just be willing to ride the coattails of if you have an employee or a founder who's has a much bigger following, like let that be what grows the company page and attracts things over time. But having that staying power and something that's consistently there for the company and owned by the company, I think is really important.
Um, yeah, I, a company I'll be curious about is like that prompts in my head is Gong.
Yeah.
Only because like I don't work in sales, so like I see their stuff, which is amazing that I see their stuff or follow them in some ways. Um, but I definitely was brought to and watch them because of Devin Reed, um,
Right.
who now is it Clary?
Yep.
Um,
Clear. Yep.
and so I'll just be curious. Like, I still think Gong has talented marketers over there, who are going to do a nice job of doing
Yep.
the consistency part. But I'll be very curious to see like if the performance is the same, or how they communicate they're doing via social media with the like missing element of that employee influencer.
Yeah. 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 And it is interesting. So Chris at Gong, I think I think potentially even before Devin came out. I don't know all the details, but I think he reaches a lot more of the sales side of that audience,
Mm-hmm.
um, and uh, Devin, being content marketing, had just naturally built up a lot more on the marketing side. So um, I think there are pieces of it, but like that just may be a hard piece for them to gain back a lot of traction there. But maybe not, because I think they've built up the company page and the presence there as well. But yeah, that's definitely a recent one. Um, but there's just a lot that goes with that, and it's not like uh, whatever, like professional sports when uh, whatever, say baseball because we're in postseason right now, but like the um the star player leaves, like they take their stats with them pretty much, you know. Obviously not
Yeah,
past ones, but like the RBIs and hits and on base and everything like that goes like the team can't keep that in any way.
sure.
Um and so I think if you're not um intentional about what you're doing and you're just purely dependent on people, then you're subjecting yourself to that situation where you lose that reach, you lose the audience, you lose a lot of that when they leave if you haven't built it up otherwise. So
For sure.
um, I think I've gone back and forth for sure because I think um, in the last 8 to 10 years, I think there's been we talked about this more with Twitter, like big departure away from people being like excited to follow a brand and talk to a brand on a social profile.
Mhm.
Um, and it's really much more about like I'd rather connect with and engage with people. Um, but I do think that LinkedIn is a bit unique in that from a distribution standpoint, the company page can still add a ton of value. And it's just further benefited by the personal profiles and team outreach and that kind of stuff.
For sure. Cool.
Yep.
That's a lot of
Cool.
LinkedIn.
All right. Well, I think we've covered a lot. And we have a few more episodes remaining for this season, or we'll talk about um, measurement of content distribution and a few other things in the upcoming episodes. So be sure to visit 10speed.io/podcast where you can see, listen to, or watch any of the past episodes we've had from prior seasons or this season if you want to get caught up on this season. And then you feel free to subscribe on the site to get notified when we have new episodes drop, or you can subscribe on Apple, Spotify, any of the platforms that you choose to listen on. So yeah, thanks again, Derek, and for anyone still listening, thanks for joining us on this discussion around LinkedIn distribution.